In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you 8 mistakes that beginners make while handling the camera in church. Shalom to you, my friends. My name is Isaac from Drago Studios. On this channel, we train media volunteers to become well-equipped as they offer their service to God in the media. If this sounds like you, I want you to consider subscribing if you have not done so, and click the notification bell so that you can be notified each time we post a new video. So without further ado, let's get started. So mistake number 1 that beginners make while handling the camera is improper exposure. And by improper exposure, I mean it's either your composition is overexposed or underexposed. When I say overexposed, that is your subject is exposed too bright such that the highlights are beginning to wash out. By underexposure, I mean that your subject is not visible enough in the composition such that the faces are still dark or there are too much shadows and you cannot clearly define what is in the composition. So this is a common mistake that beginners make, and they tilt more towards the overexposure side because they understand that they want people to be able to see what is on screen, and therefore they end up cranking up the exposure for the subject, thereby leading to some parts of the composition being washed out. To avoid this problem, either underexposure or overexposure, you can make use of the exposure meter on your camera. It's a line bar that is used to measure the exposure of your frame or your composition. So when the indicator is reading towards the positive side, then you know that your exposure is getting brighter and brighter, and eventually it might get overexposed. And when it is tilting towards the negative side, then you know that your composition is underexposed. Now this exposure meter reads values for the entire frame, alright? So it's not completely accurate, but it is approximately accurate. So you can get started from there. So you can make use of the exposure meter to check if your exposure is not underexposed or overexposed, alright? So usually if you have it at plus or minus 0, that's a good value for you to start. Another tool you can use on your camera to ensure a proper exposure is your zebra line. So some cameras come with the zebra line settings, so you can set it such that when you begin to get overexposed on some areas on your frame, then the zebra lines starts to cross those points, then you know you're becoming overexposed. You'll be able to adjust your exposure accordingly so as to avoid overexposure. Alright, so the zebra line is going to work for you when your shot is getting overexposed, right? So but the exposure meter works for both when it is underexposed and overexposed, but the zebra lines is accurate for overexposure. All right, the second mistake that beginners make in handling cameras in church is unpleasant composition. All right, so by unpleasant composition, I mean what we can see in the frame, what we can see in the picture that you're taking, what we can see on screen. All right, so sometimes you're trying to focus on a particular subject and there's an obstacle at the foreground leading to that particular subject you're aiming for. Sometimes the obstacle can be so large that it occupies the majority part of the screen. So this is an unpleasant, composition. The focus or your subject should take a higher percentage of your screen. Right, take for instance, now you want to take a particular person that is worshiping in church or that is listening to the word of God, and there is someone's head right in front of that person that is distracting, and is standing in your way, and still go ahead to take that shot. People will not see the serious person you're trying to focus on first. They will see the big head that is obstructing. So you must always avoid this kind of obstruction. It is better to look for a clear path for you to be able to focus on that subject, or you look for a different subject entirely. All right, when your obstacle is occupying a larger percentage of your screen, it becomes unpleasant for your viewer. So I'll say, for instance, now there's a distraction going on in the background of your subject when you're trying to take someone who is serious, listening to the message, and then there are some kids playing beside the person or behind the person. Now this is an unpleasant composition. You shouldn't take this kind of shot. But I've seen many beginner camera operators in church making these same mistakes over and over again. So you shouldn't just frame your composition based on what your subject is. You should frame your composition based on what is in the foreground and what is in the background, and make sure that the subject, the foreground and the background are a cohesive system. That is, they are not fighting each other, they are not competing with each other. So make sure that your subject is usually the focal point, the main point of your composition. And in order to achieve this, just make sure that your subject is taking a larger percentage of your screen. instead of the background or the foreground. The third mistake is poor framing. So when I say poor framing, I'm referring to how you position your subject in the frame, right? Say for instance, the camera is directly facing the pastor. It is best that you frame the pastor at the center of the composition. Not that the camera is directly facing the pastor and then the pastor, the subject, is tilted towards one side. That's going to make your frame or your composition imbalanced, right? So poor framing affects it. Also, when you're trying to frame someone in the congregation looking in the direction of the pastor, it's best to frame them, giving them a looking room. There's something we call looking room. And looking room is a space that you give in the direction that the subject is looking at. So if your subject is looking this way, so it is best that you give him a looking room, you understand? So you're framing your subject so that he's there and the direction in which he's looking, you have space in between. Not that your subject is at one tight corner and then the looking room is not there. You're giving space behind. That's a poor framing, alright? So you frame your subjects, particularly the audience, when they are looking in direction, even if it's the pastor, and you're taking a shot that is showing the side view of the pastor looking at the congregation. Now, you shouldn't frame the pastor in such a way that the pastor will be at the edge of the frame and then there will be space behind him. No, there should be space in front of him in the direction in which he's looking. So that is more pleasant to the eye than framing the pastor in the middle when you are taking a side view or putting him at the edge of the direction in which he's looking. So that's a poor framing. Another way to avoid this kind of mistakes is to make use of the principle of the rule of thirds. So there are some cameras that has this rule of thirds lines inbuilt on the camera, such that the screen is divided into three: two lines vertical and two lines horizontal, giving you three equal distances in the vertical direction and the opposite direction. So the principle of framing using the rule of thirds is that you want to make sure that your subject is at the intersection point of these lines, alright? Especially if you are capturing their side view such that they are looking in a particular direction. So make sure that your subject is meeting at the intersecting point of this line, either at the top left intersection or the top right intersection. Alright, mistake number 4 is poor headroom. Right, so what do we call headroom? So headroom is the distance from the edge of the composition to the top or the head of your subject. Right, so usually you want to give a little distance from the edge of the composition to where your head is or the head of the subject is. Alright, so sometimes people make a mistake of giving too much of headroom such that the pastor's head or the subject's head starts at the middle of the frame of the composition and then there is so much gap up here. What do you want to do with the space? That's too much, right? And sometimes some people frame it so tight that the head of the subject is hitting the head of the composition. That's also not good. So you want to give a considerable distance, just little, not too much, not too tight. You want to give a considerable distance from the head of the subject to the edge of the frame. And sometimes there might not be need for headroom, especially when you are taking a very tight close-up shot of, say for instance, someone worshiping in deep mood of worship, or someone who is listening with rapt attention. Now in those cases you zoomed in really close and you might not need to take an headroom. But when you are taking a medium shot of your pastor or your subject, you should give at least a considerable level of headroom. The fifth mistake that beginners make while operating the camera is inaccurate focusing. Alright, most times beginners battle with the fact that they have to juggle so many settings at the same time. They're thinking of exposure, thinking of composition, thinking of framing, and thinking of focus, and most times they often forget that after all the composition looks good and exposure is fine, they still need to check the focus. Alright, so many times people often make that mistakes, so forget to focus the subject. Every time you change the position of the camera or you change the focal length of the lens, if you have a zoom lens, you should know that there is going to be a need to check the focus again, because at every change of position or distance there's a need to change the focus, especially if you're operating at a very low aperture. So any slight movement is going to cause a drastic change in the focus. Alright, so you need to check the focus constantly, consistently. When you zoom into the subject, check the focus again. Is it accurate enough? Sometimes when people even do the focus, they are not careful enough to be sure that their focus is exactly where it is. Sometimes your focus might be in the foreground not on the subject, which is also inaccurate. You want your focus to be on the subject, not on the background, not on the foreground. You want the focus to be on the subject. So always check your focus to avoid this kind of mistakes. Now, to help you in the accuracy of your focus, there are some cameras that come with the peak focusing feature, which gives you a mark, either a green mark or a white mark, to show you which part of the frame is the one in focus. So usually they will have a color to represent it. So for some it might be green, some it might be white, whatever it is your camera uses. So just know that when that feature is turned on, the area of focus is going to be the one that will be highlighted with that particular color that is meant for the focus picking, and this is going to really help you to achieve an accurate focusing. The sixth mistake that most beginners make is sudden movement of the camera, right? I see this a lot of the time. So say for instance the pastor has been stable for a long time, and the cameraman is also static at that point, lost in the fact that the pastor can decide to move anytime, and then suddenly when the pastor decides to move, the cameraman is already lost in the message in whatever he is doing, and then the pastor would have reached the edge of the frame before he realizes that he ought to move with the camera, and then he suddenly moves the camera, and this is going to be distracting, and unpleasant to the eye. So sudden movement of the camera is a beginner error and should be avoided. Another way beginners exhibit this error is when trying to zoom. So sometimes you want to zoom in, you suddenly zoom into a subject, or you suddenly zoom out of that subject. Now this is so unprofessional and unpleasant to the eye. So when you want to zoom in, it is best to gradually zoom in, gradually zoom out, to pull out or to push in into the subject. Make it gradual. And if you are moving, sweeping or tilting or panning from one subject to the other, say for instance on the congregational shot, so make it gradual. Don't suddenly just move your camera. Maybe you saw an action and you quickly want to take that action. Don't make it sudden, especially if your camera is the one active at that point. Let it be a gradual movement. All right, so this is not an action film where everything happens fast. This is a church service, so make all the movements gradual so as to avoid distracting the eye of the viewers or the watchers, either through the live stream or through the video. So sometimes you're not able to achieve this on your DSLR cameras, because if you're using a broadcast camera, there should be a rocker on that camera that allows you to gradually press that rocker to zoom in, or push it backwards to gradually zoom out. So, or if you're using a zoom lens from a DSLR camera, usually the zoom wheel gets stiff. So if you try to zoom in with that wheel, it's going to be jittering, sudden. So it's better you communicate with your director to tell them you want to change your composition, or you want to correct your framing, so that they are going to disconnect you from the live stream, so that movement will not be recorded in the live stream. All right, but if you have a good camera that can gradually zoom in and zoom out, and don't suddenly push in, do it gradually. And if your zoom lens, the wheel of your zoom lens is still quite good, you can gradually push in to zoom in, or gradually push out to zoom out. So make everything gradual and not sudden. So if you are following your pastor who is moving as well, don't let the pastor get to the edge of the frame before you suddenly move the camera. While the pastor is still at the center, follow him every time you see a change of movement. Keep him at the center of the frame all the time. All right, so don't let him get to the edge of the frame before you move it. All right, mistake number 7 that I've seen beginner camera operators make in church is they forget to lock their tripod. All right, so in your tripod there's usually two movements, the vertical movement and the horizontal movement. Usually there's little movement in vertical position, especially if you're focusing on a single subject on the stage. Say for instance you're taking your pastor. Now usually there is no movement on the vertical position. I mean, your pastor is not suddenly going to grow tall or suddenly going to grow shorter. So when you have fixed a position that meets the height of a pastor, have given him a good headroom, lock the vertical position of the tripod. Right, so this is going to avoid mistakes of unwanted moves on your camera, so that the camera suddenly goes down and then suddenly goes up. That's going to be very unprofessional. So when there is no movement in the vertical position, lock up that position on your tripod stand. So, and the same should happen as well. If there's no horizontal movement, then lock the horizontal position of the camera, right, so that you won't suddenly be moving left and right by mistake. That's why you have those clamps there. to lock in your tripod. All right. So, and if your subject is also stable and stationary, you can lock both. But when there is a movement, then release the knob for the direction in which that knob will be going. And when you are releasing the knobs too, don't lose it completely and don't tighten it completely. The more you lose it, the freer the movement is going to be. But when you lose it gradually, then the movement will not be sudden when you are tilting or panning. So it's going to be gradual because the lock is going to be opposing the flow of the movement. You understand? So, but sometimes your pastor can decide to get down from the podium to come down to the the level of the congregation. So at those times, get ready, be at alert, and then you lose the vertical clamp for the tripod. And so that when the pastor gets down, you go down with him, and when he moves left, you go with him. Right? Just make sure there is no unwanted moves or irregular moves or sudden moves. All right. So make use of your clamps wisely and be at alert. Don't be carried away with the message. Be conscious of every movement that happens within your frame. Right? That's your business. So the 8th mistake that I say beginners make while angling the camera is the position of the camera. And in this point, I'll be referring to the main camera that is positioned to focus on the altar or the podium. So beginners set the position of the camera too low such that the camera is looking up at those who are on stage, and sometimes they set it too high such that the camera is looking down at those at stage. Now a good or a proper position for your main camera that is focusing on the stage will be at the high level of the ministers or whoever it is that is on the altar. So it's usually good that the level of the camera is same as the eye level of the minister or whoever it is that is on the podium. All right. So that's more pleasing and direct and just pleasing to the eye than your camera looking down on people or looking up at them. Now all of these things have their place, especially during worship. You can decide to be dynamic, but when it is your main camera, there must be a main camera that is set to look at the level, the high level, the height of the ministers on stage. So set your tripod properly to meet the stage, and if you are too short such that when you set the camera it gets higher than you, then you can get a platform on which you can stand on in order to be able to match the level of the camera so that you can operate it properly. And if it is too short for you as well, probably you're going to get a seat that would match the level of the camera height so that you can operate it at a more convenient height. Because another mistake people make again, which is a bonus mistake, is when you are setting the camera and it's higher than you, such that you have to be looking up to operate the camera. That is not good enough. All right. So thank you for staying to the end of this tutorial. If you enjoyed this video, I'd like you to give it a thumbs up by clicking the like button attached to this video and sharing the video with your friends who might need it. I also want to let you know that I created a Facebook group that is Trego Studios Training Center. So I would enjoy you to join other members on that platform so that we can discuss media related matters. You can ask your questions and get answers to it, and share your ideas and opinions based on matters relating to the media. All right. So if you have not subscribed to this channel, I will enjoy you to subscribe to this channel by clicking the subscribe button below this video and click the notification bell attached to it so that you can be notified each time we post a new video. Till I come your way next time with a new tutorial video, I want you to remain faithful in the Lord's service. God bless you. Bye.